You know, you have to give credit where credit is due. One of the problems with preaching is there's no place in a sermon to put a footnote. And so when you're quoting from somebody else, you just have to tell the congregation who you're mentioning. I had one priest friend who said, yeah, if you got a really good quote from somebody else, he says, you definitely have to mention them, but if it's a really great quote, just skip it and see if they'll think it's you. I'm not going to do that. Many years ago, the outreach committee of my last church was interested in learning more about the work of an advocacy program called the Jeremiah Group. Is anybody familiar with the Jeremiah Group? It's called the Jeremiah Group from a quote from the book of Jeremiah, where Jeremiah is told to pray for the city, to pray for the benefit of the city. And the Jeremiah Group is an advocacy group that is kind of an ombudsman. You know, if a group of people need something in their neighborhood, Jeremiah Group will help them get it. So, you know, if the playground is just falling apart and, you know, Parks and Recreation never paints anything or fixes it, this group will go and say, you know, these people need this park, and so do something about it. It was a great group. We wanted to find out more about it, so a few members of my church and I went to the Greater Starlight Baptist Church for a leadership training meeting on how to be advocates in the Jeremiah Group. We were told that the training would take all morning, followed by a lunch, followed by worship. When I arrived, I was shuffled off into the pastor's study, where it turned out all of the clergy from the surrounding churches were receiving instructions on the worship service that was going to take place later. I was asked to begin the service with the invocation, and the pastor of the Greater Starlight Baptist Church, as host pastor, was given the task of preaching the sermon. Now, of course, he knew that he would be asked to preach when he volunteered his church for the meeting. That's usually what happens. If it's your church, you get to preach. So he knew that was going to happen. However, he was just fretting over the sermon that he had prepared, because he had only received the Bible verse that he was supposed to preach on at 11 p.m. the night before. When we went into the church for the service, I, of course, opened the worship with a brief prayer. And then the pastor of the Greater Starlight Baptist Church, who had been fretting over how he could do a sermon after only finding out at 11 o'clock the night before his sermon, he went on and preached for 45 minutes. It was a remarkable sermon, in that he used two sermon illustrations that I will never forget, and you will get to hear them both in this sermon, because they both fit perfectly with today's readings. Illustration number one from the Greater Starlight Baptist Church. Illustration number one. The pastor said, "Everyone wants to go to heaven. Of course, they only say that after they've been to the doctor and received a clean bill of health." I loved what I heard that. That is so true. Faith is easy to come by when you know it won't be tested anytime soon. You know, saying, "Heaven is my home." That kind of talk sounds a little bit different and more immediate if you or someone you love has been diagnosed with a life-threatening condition. In the letter to the Hebrews that we read today, it defines faith as, in the first verse, as, I'm sorry, hold on just a second. Seems like my cards got mixed up here. No, that's right. In the letter to the Hebrews, it defines the faith as assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. Assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. The Greek word that we translated there as assurance is a very remarkable word. It's hypostasis. It's the same one that's used in the Creed, talking about substance, the existing reality. It's not just assurance. It's something that is positive, existence, substance. For a person in health who says, heaven is my home, for a person in good health, heaven can be an abstract religious construct. For a person in a hospital, heaven could be a place they might show up in a day or two. I once read about an argument that a publisher had with one of its writers. The publisher's editor was having an argument with one of the writers. I've been in those. I've written a couple of books, so I know that those arguments take place. And the argument was over the fact that the author, a good religious person, had capitalized the word hell because it's a place. The editor kept making it a small h because it was a concept. And they argued back and forth as to whether it should be a capital H or a small h. William Buckley, I don't know if you remember Bill Buckley, a wonderful conservative commentator. Bill Buckley told a story about going to a dinner party and sitting next to Flannery O'Connor. Buckley decided to open the conversation by saying, Miss O'Connor, your Christian incarnation and resurrections are powerful metaphors. To which Flannery O'Connor replied, if they are metaphors, then the hell with them. One of the verses that was left out of the reading that we had today, and I'm not quite sure, it was one of those ones that just got skipped over, says this: for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Must believe that he exists and he rewards those who seek him. God is not a metaphor, not even an intellectual assent. God must be a living reality that can be pursued and be pleased. And the question remains, how real is God for you? Which is the same question as, how deep is your faith? You know, when you're all dressed up and sitting down at the country club for dinner, and the babysitter is watching the kids in the nice house, and your new car has been parked in valet parking, at times like that, it's easy to give a loud amen to the prayer, God will provide. But as the pastor of the Greater Starlight Church told us, illustration number 2, true faith is when you have no food in the pantry, but you set the table anyway. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, an assurance so strong that it is a living reality. God's promise of life eternal, of the forgiveness of sin, of the joy of heaven, is still only a promise. But with faith, the promise is a reality that people stake their life on.